That's fine. That's fine. I'm Harry Notby. I'm president of Aquinas College, and I'm delighted to welcome you all here today. We've been looking forward to today's event for many, many months. And what we've seen so far on campus has proved out that our anticipation was worthwhile. I have no doubt that you're going to find that as well in just a few minutes. So I won't stand between you and that experience very much longer. My role today is not to introduce Faith, but introduce Beth Ann Williams, who will be introducing her. And Beth Ann is probably one of the most appropriate people to introduce Ms. Ringold, as for the past, since September, she was elected president of the West Michigan Quilters Guild. And over the past 12 years has established herself as a renowned contemporary quilt and mixed media artist. She's been a featured artist of the prestigious National Quilting Association, and her award-winning work has appeared in museums, galleries, magazines, and calendars. She is the author of 3 books and has appeared on the Home and Garden and DIY television networks. Beth Ann exhibits, lectures, and teaches a variety of fabric and surface design workshops and classes across the country. And we're so glad and so fortunate to have her today to introduce our special guest, Beth Ann.
Are we on? Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We're really thrilled to have Faith here with us, and we're thrilled to have you here with us. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone, if you could please turn your cell phones off so that it doesn't disrupt anyone. But you are welcome to photographs if you would like to. So I was also asked to tell you that. On a professional note, I'm actually a little bit in awe of Faith Ringold. And I've been talking to her for the last 15 minutes or so, and I'm still tingling, you know. She is a professor emerita of art at the University of California in San Diego, the recipient of more than 75 prestigious awards, including 17, I hope I counted right, 17 honorary doctorates of fine arts degrees, the Caldecott Honor and Coretta Scott King Award for Best Illustrated Children's Book. Her artwork has been exhibited around the world as included in important permanent collections such as the Guggenheim, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Museum of Modern Art, and the Boston Museum of Fine Art. On a more personal note, I'm deeply grateful to Faith Ringold for through what she has created and also the way she has lived her life. She's provided my daughters and myself with context in which to discuss important, albeit sometimes difficult, issues, for helping me to reevaluate the cultural significance of our quilt-making heritage. I'm an at least 4th generation quilt maker, and she opened my eyes to the importance and significance of that heritage, and to recognize the potential of fabric as a media for telling our stories. And finally, I'm grateful to her for inspiring me to believe that as a wife and mother, it was still possible for me to have a career as a professional artist and to develop a voice that could be heard. In very real ways, her career has helped make careers like mine possible. So thank you, Faith. I appreciate that. You don't know how much. Please join me in welcoming Faith Ringold to Grand Rapids.
Thank you. It is a great honor and a privilege to be here with you today at the oldest coeducational Catholic college in the country. And as a feminist, no woman, I want to read to you a story. Why the women could fly. It all began when the men and women gathered around the great lady to get all the things they needed to live on the earth. When she took out the wings, the man asked, "What are wings for?" And the women grinned and giggled because they knew wings were for them. The great lady answered, "Wings are so that people can fly." But all the men heard was the word fly, and they gasped and looked down to see if she was talking about their fly. And in that second, the women tucked the wings to their sides, having already grinned and giggled. They shed a tear, threw a kiss, flapped their wings, and took off with a swoosh, quickly darting from cloud to cloud, and were gone. And that is the first we knew that the women could fly. But we always heard that women had magical ways, and that they could make do with just a little and pretend it was a lot, and cause things to look good when they weren't at all, and have everybody feeling fine when they really felt bad. And so we call them women instead of men, and female instead of male, because no one knew what else to call them. And that was okay, because we didn't know what to make of them anyway, considering the fact that they could make babies and could fly. Folks say, back in slavery days, that the women would forget and fly off to freedom and have to come back and get the men. And back in Africa, the women would slip off into the bush with their wings tucked under their arms, and then they'd grin, giggle, shed a tear, blow a kiss, flap their wings, and go swoosh, and they'd take off into the sky, quickly darting from cloud to cloud, and be gone. The next day, they'd pretend that they had been home all the time. But everyone knew better, because the rains came and the crops grew, and a child was born, and the people rejoiced, and everything that was wrong was now right in the village. And the women would just grin and giggle and say they didn't know anything about it. But one day the men followed them, and when the women got to the clearing in the bush and spread their wings to take off into the sky, the men called out, "Stop, come back." And the women stopped and came back, and the men said, "This is men's work. We will take care of whatever business you have in the sky. Give us your wings so we can fly." And so the women thought about it long and hard, and the men got impatient and with waiting and demanded that the women give them their wings. And so the women, although fearing there would be trouble, gave the men their wings. But every time the men went to fly, there would be a woman or two who would go along to grin, giggle, shed a tear, blow a kiss, and flap her wings, and then we'd feel a cool breeze and hear a swoosh, and the men would take off into the sky, quickly darting from cloud to cloud, and be gone. And the next day the rains came and the crops grew and a child was born. We'd rejoice, and everything that was wrong was now right in the village. And the men would just smile, and the women would too. But before long, the men got the idea to attack neighboring villages if they did not surrender their land. And so the men's village grew, and they became rich and powerful. And we call that progress, because no one knew what else to call it. Then other villages thought of doing the same thing. So now there were villages everywhere fighting over land and resources, and we call that war. And the men were called warriors, because we didn't know what else to call them. And that was okay, because no one knew what to make of it anyway, except that the men always found something to war about. It was either land, rights, causes, beliefs, something. But the women rarely went to war. What with having children, teaching, and taking care of everything at home, women simply didn't have time to go to war. And furthermore, the women hated war because their men had to go and often did not come back. But still the men went to war over one thing and another, and the women had babies and took care of everything at home. And we called them housewives and mothers because we didn't know what else to call them. And the men were called husbands and fathers, though they were rarely home, what with their love of wars, mergers, sports, games, and other things. But it was okay because no one really knew what to make of all this anyway. And so the men took what they wanted because they needed it, and that was okay because no one knew what else to do. And then when they wanted more things, they looked around to see who had things they wanted, and they found that some things could be people. And so they took the people and called them slaves. And the people who were called slaves worked free, and we call that slavery. And that made the men even more rich and powerful, and that was not okay, but no one knew how to stop it. One day the women decided to no longer grin, giggle, shed a tear, throw a kiss, and flap their wings to set the men off to fly. And without that, the men's wings would not work, because it was really only the women who could fly. And everybody knew that, and now the men knew too. So the men lost their fascination with wings that could fly. They now had airplanes that could fly. They could fly in and make war at the same time. And that was called air warfare, because no one knew what else to call it or what to make of it anyway. Except for the women, who were really deeply concerned with war, slavery, poverty, oppression, greed, and hunger in the villages. And so the women looked at the world and threw up their hands in despair, and their bodies went up too, and they went up, up, up into the sky, and they looked down on all the problems of war, and they knew they had the power to change this, because they were the ones who made the babies to keep all this going. And so the women grinned, giggled, shed a tear, threw a kiss, flapped their wings, and we heard a thunderous roar, and swoosh, they went up, up, up into the outer sky, and they have never been heard from again until now. Okay. On that note, I'd like to show you some of my work. We're going to go back to the 1960s, one of the most powerful periods of my life, and certainly, could we have the lights out, please? One of the most powerful periods, well, I mean, the most exciting period of my life was definitely the 1960s. I keep trying to make it now, but it's not now at all. It's not now at all. I keep hoping that maybe this period will change into a period like the 60s where everybody's trying to make things better. And I don't know that that's going to happen. One of the big changes that we made in America in the 1960s was the integration of the colleges and universities. And this painting was done in tribute to that move. She's carrying a study book. And it's also the first picture that I did in which I'm writing something. So I just wrote the word study. See, we always begin very small. You know, just one word, you know, and that was scary. So I just gave her a book and I put study on it, and I gave her four caution signs and arrows and stop signs. This was very much influenced by the pop art movement of the 1960s. A young man here, portrait of an American youth. A young man sitting in a chair surrounded by red, white, and blue symbols showing the kind of danger he faced in his own life every day. The 1960s gave us an opportunity to create in our art work that was politically related to the American dream. And it's always a dream that makes people have political ideas. They want life to be a way, and they are trying to communicate that to other people. I wanted to have a voice in my work, and I knew that as a woman it was going to be difficult for me to do that. And so I had to just get out there and do it. Of course, it was hard in that I was not appreciated for doing it. Because in the 1960s, even though it was my wonderful time, I loved it, the art that was popular in those days was not political. The art that was popular was very unpolitical. Unpolitical and apolitical. Because maybe that was because that was selling. Or maybe it's because artists didn't think they should get involved in politics. This was my first flag painting. And somebody came to my house and said, looked at that painting and said, "God bless America." And I said, yeah, I like that. And I used it as my title. The second flag painting I did was this one. The Flag is Bleeding. I did it in 1967. So through the early part of the 60s, I developed this mature body of work. And I call it my mature body of work because that's what you produce at the time when you say, I am an artist and what I'm doing is serious. And I think you have to say that yourself. You can't depend on your friends to say it for you or someone else. You have to make your mind up that you are no longer just trying, you are doing. The Flag is Bleeding, 6 by 8 feet, one of the first really large painting that I've ever done. The Black Power postage stamp. When I first heard the word Black Power, I wondered, am I going to have some power? Does that mean me? Nobody ever gives you any power. I think you have to probably assume it. So I figured that part out. Also, lots of writing in this. Airmail, 1967, 10 cents. We had airmail stamps in 1967, and they were 10 cents. Today, nothing is 10 cents. And we don't have particularly airmail mail. The mail is all airmail or ground, depending on where it's going. But when I heard those words, Black Power, and I saw how upset it made so many people that black people in this country were linking black with power, I thought, the power that really reigns in this country is unspoken but so obvious. And I put it in my painting. So that people, when they first saw that painting, the only thing they saw was the black power. But then after they looked at it long enough, they would notice that there's another 2 words that are written on there in white. You see those? They're horizontal. You put your head to your right shoulder and you can read. Can somebody in the audience read those words? W is the first letter, huh? H, see it? I, huh? T. Next one is E, huh? Got it? P. Got it? O. See it? W. E. Huh? Last one. Ah. 100 faces. At that time, we were 10% of the population. And I just wanted to get that story. So that was a way of telling a story with just a few words. This one, 6 by 12 feet, called Die, a spontaneous street riot. And I did this one because we were having so many assassinations. The Kennedys, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, and on and on and on. People who were trying to make things better were ending up assassinated. And it was a great deal of violence, but nothing like today, nothing. I mean, it was the beginning, it wasn't even the beginning. Anyway, it's just really not as much violence as we now have. As a matter of fact, when I even say that, people say, violence? Well, where's the violence? Well, painting that blood on there was very traumatic for me. Painting somebody, you know, with blood on their face and all, you know, made me almost feel like I had cut them. I had done something. Also, in this painting, this is the beginning of the change of my palette. My palette has changed with that gray background, which emulates the street. And here you see a changed palette, marking the Black is Beautiful period of the late 1960s. American Black art. So many contributions to American art came over here during slavery. And I think in many ways it saved our lives to bring that beautiful music and the sense of movement and the storytelling and the quilts and all of these wonderful treasures, almost like a gift for being taken into slavery, but not. And so I wanted to salute that. And I did it with this painting. More and more words I'm using here. Also during the 60s, it was common not to sign your name on your paintings. I never knew what that was about. Why anybody would not put their name on their picture. I think some people had the attitude, oh, well, everybody knows that I did this. Well, nobody knew I did anything, and I damn well knew it. So I did this painting called Ego Painting, in which I put my name in there 4 times, so they would get the message, you know. In 1969, I got a chance to have my work in my first collection, public collection, which is very important for an artist to be in a public collection, because then your work is exhibited publicly and lots of people get to see it on a continuing basis. The Chase Manhattan Bank, actually it was David Rockefeller, president of the Chase Manhattan Bank at that time, who wrote me a letter and said, I'd like you to sell us a painting for our collection. I was very excited about that, not realizing that I really didn't have anything to sell, because all of my work is bleeding flags and dye and all that. You know, they weren't going to buy that for the bank, because you know, they don't want to mix all that with the money. You see? But anyway, so when the curators came, I showed them all the work that you just saw, and then finally I showed, and they were very upset by everything they saw, and they read, and it, you know, it just kept getting worse and worse. And so finally, when they saw this one, they said, "Oh, this is a flag, but it doesn't say anything. So this one will be okay." And so the man said to the woman, "But wait, I think we better read it first." "No, you don't have to read it. There's nothing to read." "Oh, yes, there is. Yeah, you better read. You know, I think it says D-I-E in the stars. And then the stripes say, oh no, those are just stripes. It doesn't say." "Yes, it does. Now let's just look at this. This is, you put your head now to the left side, see, and now you got an N, and you got an I, and a G, and another G. And that's no good. We are not getting that." This painting was done in 1969, really at the event of going to the moon. All those billions of dollars that were spent to go to the moon, our children went to bed hungry in America. So I call this one Flag for the Moon, Die Niggas. And they would have no part of it. So they left, you know, and now I still have to find them the picture, because you gotta come back. So when they came back, I showed them this one, which is, the title of this one was really 6 shades of black. Because black people encompass all the races, all the colors of the world. So that's what I was saying here. But I didn't tell them that. They liked it. They said there was no words on it. They really searched for good. Make sure there were no words. And there were none. I said, no, there are no words. And so finally, I said the name is the American Spectrum. And they loved it. Oh, sometimes you make a few changes, here and there. One of the big things that we did, lots of artists in the 1970s, because we're now into the 70s, was to do posters that we could give away to people. Because we wanted our art in the hands of the people, but art is an expensive thing because it's an original thing. And so very often the people that you would like to own your work can't. So, but we made lots of posters, and we could run them off cheaply. It's amazing how much less expensive it was to create this kind of art then than it is now. This one is called Angela Free Women, Women Free Angela. And Angela meaning Angela Davis. This other one that I did has to do with Attica prison and the riots that happened in the prison. People were getting very concerned about what was happening in the prisons. And I did this poster to identify all the different kinds of violent acts that had happened in each of the states, and the documentation of the number of people who died and who were wounded and so on in all the wars that America has been involved in, including the Middle Passage is around the map of the United States. And that was done in 1971. By 72, I did another one. By 73, there was just too much going on. I could not add. So I just said on there, add your own. Also in the 70s, I began to do soft sculptures. I've always had a lot of children who come to my lectures. My mother said, you should do some dolls for the kids and put them up there and give them something, to look at. Although I've always found that kids like art. I mean, they're very sophisticated. They seem to understand what they're looking at. And they like all forms of art, not just dolls. But it was interesting to do that. I'm glad I did it because my mother and I collaborated. She made the clothes, and I sewed their faces. And I wanted to do all different kinds of images of America, because that's one thing that's very unique and very good about this country, is that we have so many different kinds of people here. And so I used lots of different kinds of costumes. My mother made the clothes, actually. We shopped in Chinatown for this Chinese silk so that we could make them look as authentic as possible. It was so much fun to do these. And I discovered that from going to Egypt that many of the women who wear these chadors or coverings really have on all kinds of things underneath those robes. They're not at all simply dressed. Many of them are beautifully dressed in all different kinds of things. I was fascinated with that. I wanted to show that I could make a portrait as well by sewing the heads. And so I called the White House, and the Carters were in at the time, and asked for some photographs. And they sent me a whole lot of photographs. And so I thought it would be nice to do them, since they were the presidents at the time. We also had a growing problem with homelessness. Women who were in the street probably many of them because they were released from mental institutions and were not taking their medicine. However, they would dress in very interesting ways, gathering bits of cloth and old clothes from dumpsters, but in a very creative look. I think this is a style that has left and has not returned. But I think it's a style that has influenced other styles that are not homeless. That's what I should say. Because, we call them bag ladies. And I did a lot of sculpture of these women carrying these bags and dressed in these odd clothes. And also of Wilt Chamberlain. Because he's 7'3", and I just thought, God, he is a human sculpture. And so I made 3 sculptures of him, actually. This is just one of them. Masks I made. The first one in early 1973. I made the first mask that I made, and there was a whole series of them. So everything I do is in lots of series, so you're only getting to see one of each. This is from the Family of Women series, and my mother made the clothes, I made the faces, and they really memorialized the wonderful women that I knew as a child, and how many of them never got to be all they could be, but they were just so courageous and wonderful. I wanted to do a series of memorial masks dedicated to them, and that's Miss Jones and family. I also needed, as an artist, I needed a body of work. So I've been working on that since I graduated from college in the 1950s. And then you need an audience. You need to develop your work so that you get lots of people to see it. And from the people that you get to see your work, you get opportunities to do other things. The final thing that you want to do is get a market, which is sell your work. So I needed to show my work because New York had a very limited taste for gallery dealers in New York had a very limited taste for political art, as I told you before. And so I didn't have an opportunity to be in a gallery in New York. But what I did have was an opportunity to show my work all over the country, in colleges and universities, if I could get it there, if I could ship it. So I saw Tonkas, which is a Tibetan and Nepalan way of working, in which you have a painting on silk, and then it's surrounded by beautiful cloth or silk borders. It's a kind of Buddhist, it goes along with Buddhist prayers, and a very old genre of work. And I saw this when I was in Amsterdam, Holland, at the Rijksmuseum. And I said, boy, I could do that. That would be beautiful. I could frame my paintings in cloth, and then I wouldn't have to have the glass in the frame and all that heavy and 2 men in a truck. I could put my work, roll my work up, put it in a trunk, and ship it all over the country. And I did that by making these Tonkas. And then I could also, continue with my painting. Uninterrupted. This is a slave rape series. My mother made the Tonkas, the framing in cloth, for all of these series of works that I did. That's through the 70s. Now we're into 1980, when I am making my first quilt. And there again, I am continuing to paint using my work in soft structures. But this time, I'm going to make a quilt. Because a quilt you can make even bigger than you can make a tonka, because the stitching will strengthen the work, and it makes it sort of 2-dimensional and 3-dimensional at the same time. I was invited to be in a show called The Artist and the Quilt. And so my mother put the quilt together. I did the painting, and my mother put the quilt together. And here is my first quilt that I did in 1980, called Echoes of Harlem. When I did this first quilt in 1980, well, I thought it was a really good idea, and I really wanted to do more, but I also thought that it took forever to do a quilt. So I probably wouldn't be able to do more than one a year. My mother died in 1981, and to commemorate her and to memorialize her, I did this quilt myself. This was my second quilt I ever did, and I did it myself, and then I kind of hid it because I don't know. Sometimes we think there's a quilt, there's an art police, who kind of says what you can do and what you can't do, and not many people liked it, so I kind of hid it away. So that was the second one. The third one I did because I had written my autobiography in 1980 and couldn't get it published because, the agent that I had thought this does not sound like a stereotypical black woman's life, and nobody's going to buy this, and so she said, you need to rewrite this. I figured what I needed to do was continue writing. I needed to accelerate instead of stopping or trying to make up something that people are going to like to hear. I need to write more. And that is really why I began making story quilts. I started writing stories on all my work. But the first one I did is this one. In 1983, I did Who's Afraid of Aunt Jemima? And I didn't call it a story quilt because I really wasn't thinking of it as a story quilt. So I called it Quilt and Book, because I thought of it as kind of like a book. And then everybody kept saying, oh, you're making story quilts. And I said, oh, am I? And because, that's why you should do your work, because you don't really know what you're doing until you do it. You do it, you don't really know, and you don't have to know. All you have to do is do it. If you do it, then the rest of us will tell you what you're doing. That's our job. This is the fourth one that I did. Flag story quilt. And it is one of the few quilts that I've done that doesn't have painting on it. Those are, tie-dye strips. And an elaborate story about a young man who goes off to war and what happens to him when he comes back. Street Story is the fourth quilt that I did, and it's 84 inches tall by 144 inches wide. So this will give you an idea of why quilts are so important to me. Not only can you roll them up and put them in a trunk, they're lightweight, you don't need two men in a truck, but they also lend themselves to telling stories, and they can be as big as you want them to be, and it's okay. Now this story here is on the Metropolitan Museum of Art website, metmuseum.org. So if you want to know what the story is, you can go on there and you can read it. And the images are all there as well. And they bought it in 1990. Didn't show it until the year 2000. But this is the way things are. So it's slow. Being an artist is a way of life. It's not. I think a lot of people, especially young people, think it's something that, you just get out there and you get to be real famous right away. I don't think it happens. I know it doesn't happen with women, period. Case closed. Does not happen with women. But even with the men, and white men particularly, it's not going to happen overnight. You get rotated a lot. It's an extremely difficult thing to do and have it stick and stay. The first work that I did that was autobiographical was this quilt called Change, Faith Ringold's Over 100 Pounds Weight Loss Performance Story quilt. And in this one, I have all the decades of my life, kind of like a photo montage of them with words about each one of the decades. Because I was trying to figure out when was it that I gained the weight. And you can find that out if you just go into your picture album, get all your pictures out from the day you were born, and you can see what changes happened in your life. And that's what I did. So I got my pictures together from 1930s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s. And 1986, I was supposed to lose this 100 pounds. And I didn't quite lose the 100 pounds. I lost 80. But my mother always said, fake it till you make it. And so I just went on like I did. And then I made this costume that I used to do the performance in. The performance, I never exhibited this costume anywhere but on me in the performance, except once I exhibited it at a museum in South Carolina where it was stolen out of the director's office. So if you see anyone now, this must be the one that's in the show. I did this one in 1988. That was 2 years after the first one I did that was in 1986. And the idea was to lose those extra pounds and be able to say it, that I had lost, I really was, I really did lose the 100. But it didn't happen. And so I decided to paint myself instead of showing a photograph to document the added weight loss. I would paint myself. Because when you're an artist, you can do that. Yeah. Now this one I did in 1990, and this one shows me at all the different weights. But the important thing is to just keep trying. And in this, I make each one of those people a different person, but they're really all me. And the discussion goes on and on and on, because everybody has a dialogue about losing weight. The wedding. Lots of my stories are about family and love. And here is a couple who gets married. The marriage is doomed from the beginning. There's problems everywhere. And so finally, instead of having them break up, I let them both die. And because I've always wanted to do a funerary quilt anyway. So I get to do that. A lot of it has to do with things you really want to picture anyhow. And I just let the story fit in with what I wanted to do. Groovin' High, about dancing. Now later you're going to see my music, my jazz pictures, and I think you have some over there, and I'm really consumed with that now. But in 1986, this was the first jazzy kind of imagery that I did, and it's really about going to the Savoy Ballroom in Harlem in the 40s and early 50s. We used to go, provided we went to church, we could go on Sunday. And this one is Who's Bad? Michael Jackson. Yeah. And this one is Sonny Rollins, another superhuman, wonderful, really creative artist, the most important jazz saxophonist alive today is Sonny Rollins, whom I grew up with on Edgecombe Avenue. And he inspired me as a child to just keep working. Don't, never mind blowing off key. Just keep on blowing till you get it right. And he did that. He used to go up on the bridge to blow his horn because he didn't want to disturb his neighbors. And so I thought, I'm going to do a quilt in tribute to him. And I'll call it Sonny's Quilt. And then I thought, women do that all the time. They kind of go up on bridges and look over their lives and make heroic changes that fit with their lifestyle, just like Sonny did. And so I used the bridge and the quilt and put that all together to make a series called the Woman on a Bridge series, of which Tar Beach was the first. And the editor from Random House saw this work on a poster and read the story. And that was the general idea, to write the story on the art so that when a picture of the art was taken, the words would be too, and I'd get published, unedited, every time. So she called me up and she said, I think this would make a really good children's book. And I said, well, nobody else has said that. And I have been to a lot of publishers. And everybody says, oh, this would be an art book. And, you know, art books don't sell that well. And, you know, and we don't know you and so on. So she said, would you be interested in doing a children's book? And I said, I would love to. I didn't know I could. See, there again. You don't know what you're doing until somebody else tells you. And so I made my first children's book. She made a dummy for me, a 32-page dummy, and I did my first children's book, which was Tar Beach, which opened the way for me getting my autobiography published later on. So I wrote my autobiography in 1980. I got it published in 1995. So it took me 15 years to get the autobiography published. But my first children's book was published in 1991. On Harriet's Underground Railroad in the Sky was my second one. The dinner quilt is this one, which is a quilt, and it inspired Dinner at Aunt Connie's House, another one of my children's books. And this is Bonjour Lani, about a little orphan boy who actually was born in Paris, but he didn't know it, and had a little black boy with red hair and green eyes. And so it tells his story of who his parents are, because Lovebird came to the orphanage and led him to Paris to find out who he was. If a Bus Could Talk, the story of Rosa Parks, the mother of the civil rights movement, who so heroically refused to move to the back of the bus. And then Martin Luther King, who became known for leading the bus boycott, which she initiated. Oh Holy Night is the first book that I did that I didn't write, because they're all Christmas carols, and that was a great deal of fun to do. I was able to use my friends and colleagues as angels in this series, because so many people have been angels in my life. And there's a string of 5 of them right there. 5 angels. This was wonderful. The Boys Choir of Harlem has a CD that goes with this book. And on the back cover are 4 angels. So I use my assistant, Grace, and a very dear friend, Linda, and my 2 daughters on the back cover. They're angels, or would like to be. Freedom of speech. And here I'm commemorating freedom of speech. This is a commission that I got from the Constitution Center in Philadelphia in 1990. I did this in Paris, in which I interviewed people about who their greatest proponent of freedom of speech in America was. And that's one thing we do have. I mean, you may suffer from, opening your mouth. But if you don't, you're going to suffer worse, because you're going to lose your right to do so. And so this is a tribute to that. Freedom of speech is so important. It's really the one thing that you don't have to ask anybody to do. You can just do it. Also, at the Metropolitan, on the Metropolitan website, freedom of speech is a Met bestseller in that they made posters of that piece, and you can get them on the website. It's been going on now for about 5 to 6 years, since 9/11, so it would be 4 years. Another phase of sculpture that I did, these are later sculptures in the 1980s, and this one is called Bubba. And when I was a child, I used to be fascinated by the young men who would come home wrapped in the American flag, because we could see them, the funeral parlor door would be open and families would be coming in, and you could see these caskets. There were so many of them coming, and here we have the same thing, similar, going on now today. And so I made a casket for Bubba, and I put that Ku Klux Klan pin on there, because some young men escaped death at war but came home to get lynched, and they too got a hero's burial. Lucy, the 3.5 million year old lady, I thought I'd give her a proper burial too. She was found in Ethiopia, and but just with some frog's eggs and frog's legs, I think. And so I made her a proper casket and put her little treasures in a little box. In 1990, I went to Europe to create the French collection, a series of works about a woman named William Marie Simone. It's 2 minutes after 1. Where am I? How am I doing? Pardon me? Okay. When I was in college, we learned to copy the great European masters. That was the technique that our teachers used. Picasso, Monet, Degas, Matisse. It, I'm sure, stunted lots of people and did me for many years before I found my own way to who I was. But in 1990, I got an opportunity to go back to Europe and to stay there over a period of time to do a new series, and I did this French collection. So I wanted to put the European masters with my own identity as an African American woman. And William Marie is the heroine of this collection. And here she is at the Louvre, and I call this dancing at the Louvre, because that's the last thing you want to be caught doing, is dancing at the Louvre. But I always thought that you shouldn't lose your culture in the presence of someone else's, and so that's why I had them dancing in front of these great paintings in the Louvre Museum. Here, I wanted Willia to know about who she was as a woman, and the history of art suggests that the men have done women nude in the presence of men fully clothed for centuries. And so I let her do a picture of the women fully clothed in the presence of a male nude. And what better nude male than Picasso? They're in Monet's garden in Giverny. I spent the whole day there doing sketches and figuring out how I was going to do this. So what I did was I traveled all over Europe. Here I went to Arles, where Van Gogh lived in that little yellow house, and I sat in the square there, and I figured out what I was going to do there. And I do sketches, lots of sketches and studies, and then I came back to the studio, and I would begin the painting, start the painting, and hope I would finish it. Actually, I did finish. Between Paris and the south of France, I was able to complete the 12 paintings for the most part in Europe during those 5-6 months. Matisse's model. Now, William Marie, I let her meet everyone. So she gets to know Picasso, Matisse, everyone. And she models for them. And symbolically, because Matisse and Picasso were so influenced by African art, they want to use her image, which is which speaks to an African ancestry. Then I liberally borrowed from Matisse, you know, as we were taught to do. Yeah, okay. Here again, I'm doing it. And this is Jo Baker, who definitely went to Europe to be a performer at a time when it was very difficult for her to achieve that kind of fame in America. She was there, and here the discussion here, the story, is about motherhood, because you know she adopted 12 children, and it was very difficult for her. So Willia has that problem because I get Willia married. She marries a very wealthy Frenchman who dies. But I don't let him die before they have 2 kids because I don't want her to have regrets. So she doesn't have to regret never getting married. She doesn't have to regret never having any kids because she has 2. But then she has to be concerned about other things, and I'll tell you about those later. I let her meet Gertrude Stein and all the important writers, and she goes to Gertrude Stein's salon and meets Leo Stein and Zora Neale Hurston, and that's probably one of the most difficult things for a female artist is to meet the important artists of your time. It's difficult to do that before you become significant yourself. Café des Artistes. He left her a lot of money, but he also left her a cafe so that she could talk with all the artists about art, which was really very important. So here she is. I put myself over there in the corner, way over on the side. And so I just give her everything that she needs to be an artist. But here she is in her studio in Morocco, talking with her daughter, Marlena, about why she didn't raise her. And she's trying to equate her life with the lives of these great African-American men, Douglass and Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, and Martin Luther King. Now, the daughter doesn't buy that, but what I'm trying to say is that it's just really so difficult pursuing a career. To have a job is one thing, but to have a career is extremely difficult. And you know, these guys don't have to be great fathers to be great men. But so Marlena doesn't understand what her mother's really talking about. But I give her the next series called The American Collection, in which Marlena is the heroine. And here she is as a little child, and here's her mother, Willia, in the white dress, because Willia always wears a white dress. And she's sitting there holding the brother, Pierre, and the sister. You notice the brother looks like the father, and the sister, Marlena, looks like the mother. And in the picture, that's Aunt Melissa, who gave William Marie the money to go to Paris in the first place when she was 16 years old in 1920. So this whole story really has a lot to do with the Harlem Renaissance, and then up to the 40s, to the 1940s, when Marlena comes into play. Because Marlena and her brother go to America to get raised by Aunt Melissa. And so here's Marlena in her beautiful garden and her house. And the whole story here now is about Marlena and what it's like to become an African American artist, what it should be like, what it isn't like, but should be like, to become an African American artist in the 1940s and 50s and 60s. And here I am, and I'm showing you here, painting the next picture that's coming up. This is the early stages of painting that picture. And this is the way I paint pictures. I use acrylic paint, I use it with lots of water in it, and I use a series of glazes so that when it's finished, it looks like this. Keeping the paint thin, very, very thin, so that it doesn't pile up and obstruct the weave, so that you can sew through it very easily. And this is Marlena in a Picnic on the Grass alone. And she's alone because she doesn't I don't let her get married or have children. So these stories are different in that way. Next, please. That's a difficult issue, and I give her everything else, as you will see. She gets, here, she has an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art. Not just one gallery, she gets the whole museum. She has Charlie Parker and Miles Davis playing for her. She truly has everything. So, you gotta lose out some kind of way, right? Also, Andy Warhol, I want to put him in the mix. He's American, important artist, made a really interesting contribution of the repetition of faces. Did Marilyn Monroe and Elizabeth Taylor. And so this one is Bessie Smith. And not using silk screen, but using templates instead. Willem de Kooning, another really wonderful artist that I wanted to put into this American collection. And he's rather well known for doing these grotesque women, with the gnarled teeth and, just really very ugly women. And so I thought I'd like ugly white women. And so I wanted to do some really grotesque black women. And because it's not something that people normally do, People try to beautify women, make them look a lot better than they are. So I thought it was very powerful when in the 50s, I saw his women's series. And it wasn't until the 90s that I got the courage to do something like that. And I did it here in the American collection. And they're called the Two Jemimas. Cotton fields, sunflowers, blackbirds, and quilting bees is this one. And this one is to put in place the idea, the fact that the quilt is a two-dimensional art form, extremely important to the innovative history of African Americans, but very rarely recognized as such. And so here I have these women quilting, slave women quilting in the cotton fields. The Flag is Bleeding, number 2. The first Flag is Bleeding I did was 30 years before I I was inspired by Sergeant Johnson's sculpture, Forever Free, of the black woman holding these two children. And I thought that that would make a good image for The Flag is Bleeding #2. Wanted, Douglas, Tubman, and Truth. 3 powerful African American abolitionists and people who escaped slavery. And I don't know whether they ever collaborated together, but I thought they should. We came to America. I think you have the etching that I did of this, and this here is the painting. And it's a dream that Marlena has on her way home from seeing her mother in Paris. She dreams that she mysteriously ends up not on the ocean liner, but in a slave ship. And when they come into the harbor, the Statue of Liberty, which is an image of an African woman because that was the original image, ignites the slave ship and all the slaves jump overboard. Born in a cotton field, which is my first real fairy tale. And it appears before the painting. This painting, incidentally, is owned by Denzel Washington. And when I went to his house and walked through that 40-foot door and saw that painting, I was just really, it just looked so much better in his house. You know what I mean? Here is The Invisible Princess, which is the children's book that I wrote from that painting. A little girl born in a cotton field who has to survive until such time as she can free the slaves of the village. In 1992, I moved from my home in Harlem, where I had grown up and lived all my life, to Englewood, New Jersey, and ran right smack into a whole bunch of hostile neighbors, which didn't even know they were being hostile toward me, because I never had any hostility where I lived, where I worked maybe, where I went to school, but not where I lived. So I wasn't paying attention, but I did finally. They were trying to keep me from building my studio, which is what I had come there to do. And so here I'm showing you the studio, which I did build, because, if you have enough time and you've got some money, you can buy your freedom to do a lot of things in America that you might not be able to do otherwise. And so I persevered, and I got past that. And I was able to build my studio, which was legal all the time. It's just that they can hold you up, keep suspending the case, and run it into a lot of time, and you've got to keep paying the lawyers while that's happening. Anyway, I got around that, and this is what I had planned to do, and my dream did eventually come true. And I created out of that experience, which was extremely traumatic, and the first experience of that kind that I've ever had, a series called Coming to Jones Road, which I understand you have. And I think, and so here I want to show you, I showed you part of the studio, and here is the garden. And it really turned out to be much more rewarding than I ever dreamed it would be. And this is a bowl of flowers, some more of the garden leading down to the pond, and the swans in the pond. They're not real. I went to, I forgot this hip hop guy's name. He had real swans. And I came home and I told my husband, I said, Russell Simmons is his name. I said, Russell has real swans, not fake ones like ours. So he said, that's okay. It doesn't matter. Who the hell knows? Well, actually, when I first saw his swans, I thought they were fake like mine. until they put their head down in the water, and then I said, oh, they're real. And then I looked around to see if anybody heard me. I was so embarrassed. And this is a part of we have real fish though. And the gazebo. Now this is my great-great-grandma, Susie Shannon, who lived to be 110, died in something like 1937, and survived slavery, but never would tell the story. Maybe that's why she lived so long, come to think of it. Huh? She knew how not to tell the story. I don't know what it was. Anyway, I wrote a story for her, so that's what she gets for not telling it. And this is my great-grandma, Betsy Bingham, who was her daughter. And I used Betsy to create the heroine for Coming to Jones Road. And I call her Aunt Emmy. She's the heroine of Coming to Jones Road. Because I figured if these people don't want me to be a neighbor and live on Jones Road, then I would just bring all my ancestors on the Underground Railroad. And so I just became fascinated with this whole Underground Railroad and the scenery and the beauty of the landscape, moving through it to go to this place where you don't even know where you're going. You're just guided by a chalk white moon in a blood red sky very often. And so, okay. And so I created that series, and there's Aunt Emmy, so they're getting very close to it. And they're the children rejoicing because that's what children do. And here's a series of prints, which are done, called Under a Blood Red Sky, because I am truly fascinated with a red sky and the courage of people to move through dangerous terrain to get to freedom. And here is also a print of Aunt Emmy. And my final series is the jazz series, in which I did all these images of these women singing. I mean, I was just compulsively doing it over a period of a couple of years. I created all these women because I do believe that the ability to create that wonderful music played a very instrumental role in the freedom of black people in America. Sonny Rollins, Sonny Can Blow. Marcellus, Wynton Marcellus. And the process I use is lots of drawings, studies, and then the final work. And this is my series of jazz paintings, and I'm going to continue with this. This and Under a Blood Red Sky are going to be the things that I'm going to be working on for years to come. And this is my website, faithringold.com. If one can, anyone can. All you got to do is try. So if you want to reach me, faithringold.com. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It was absolutely fascinating. Faith is willing to take some questions right now. And so if you have a question for Professor Ringold, if you'd like to just stand up and Kathy or Sally Reeves will come and bring in a microphone and you can ask me a question.
Thank you. Out in the video that was shown in the lobby, it shows you painting on fabrics, and then you turn the fabric over, you design the quilt, and you have solar seamstresses that put it together. Is that how you've always done it, or have some of these wonderful things we've seen, have you done both the painting and the stitching?
Oh, I've always done the painting, but what you can always collaborate on is the stitching. And I've done probably 200 quilts since 1980, so I couldn't have done all of those if I did all the stitching myself. And they're done by hand, so yeah, I do use other people's stitches.
I have a similar question about your quilts. Sitting over in the gallery, I was one of the greeters. Many people asked what kind of ink you used, and many people also asked what did you use in between your quilt as the filling?
Very thin batting, as thin as possible. And ink, you mean to do the writing?
Yes.
The writing is done with Sharpie. It's permanent, and it's, you know, it's good. It stays where it's supposed to be, and it's all right.
I was just curious, the piece that you opened with, speaking, is that something that's part of one of your books about the women can fly?
About the what?
The women can fly, that story, is that
I have not published that. That's not a published piece. I write a lot of stories because I get a lot of honorary doctorates, I think. I've gotten 18, it's not 17, it's 18. And, you know, when kids are graduating, they like to hear a story. I know we loved it when I was in college. And so I write a story for them. And that's one of the stories that I read to them. And it's short, and, you know, it does the trick. Instead of, you know, giving them all this work to do, you know, you have to tell them they got to go out and they got to change the world and they got to do this and that and the other. I just read them a story. So that's one of my stories that's never been published.
My question is in relationship to your creativity. Would you talk in terms of who you are as an African-American woman that has flowed into the subjects that you're using?
How I am, what? I don't understand.
Well, as an African-American woman coming into your being in the 1960s and living all over the world,
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if there is a deliberate relationship between your experiences, who you are, and your work, or whether you were influenced because of other reasons for using the subjects that you're using.
Well, you know, I'm influenced by everything and everybody I come in contact with. If it's a negative experience, I try to make it positive, like with Jones Road. So I'm constantly looking for inspiration. So I'm constantly inspired. But I'm not inspired to not be who I am. I'm inspired to be who I am. Better, if I can, manage it. So I hope that answers your question. And it doesn't matter where I am in the world, I'm still who I am. So I bring who I am with me wherever I go. And it certainly helps to reinforce who I am by knowing who other people are. You know, if you're just in a box and you only know yourself, you don't know that much. But if you know the world, then you really get to know how you fit into the world. And so that's what I'm trying to do, and I've had the opportunity, thank God, to do that.
You are an inspiration.
My question is, I saw a PBS show last week about the 60s where they were saying that it was the first time in history that the people without power, the blacks and the students, had created and brought forth a change because the ones in power were doing nothing. And in your opinion, what do we need to have happen now?
Yeah, I think that that's really true. That the 1960s was that period. It was a magical period when a lot of wonderful things just kept happening every day. Something new happened. You know, the 1960s was when we first started using zip codes and area codes. And I remember when I first heard that we were going to have all these numbers on the phone number and all these numbers we have to write or to mail a letter, I said, oh, people will never do that. That is ridiculous. Nobody's going to remember all those numbers, but we do. And so many things happened during the 60s that didn't have anything to do with black people. But it was a time when people were just into change, making changes about things. I think what you're asking about, are you asking about today? Today is a mess. I don't know. I don't really know, but I think it's a mess because of us. It's not happening in spite of us. I mean, to say people change things. When things change, they change because people change them. And I think we're just all looking for whoever's going to do it for us. We're looking for the leadership that we need. And hopefully we'll get that, because it's only in times of real stress and trouble that great leaders come out. So maybe things will get bad enough so that we will find that great leadership that will help us to realize how good we can be. Because I really, even though I don't think what's going on here is very good, I don't want to be anywhere else because I think someplace else is worse. You know what I mean? I'm talking about this country. You know, because I think here things can change. I don't know how you do changes other places. I don't know how that works, or if it works. So I'm just hoping, like I'm sure everybody else is, that we're going to, really be the great nation that we thought we were going to be in the 60s. People really believed. So I don't know. I hope that's answering you. Maybe somebody else has a better answer.
I am really impressed with the narrative quality in
Where
your
you?
work.
Who's
I'm over
talking?
here.
Oh, okay,
Hello.
okay.
I'm a poet and writer, and I just finished a collaboration with another woman, a visual artist, and I'm really impressed with the narrative quality of your work. I love when you said sometimes people don't like words, mixed with visual art, and I love that step that you took. And I also want you to talk a bit about the collaboration you did with your mother early on with those quilts. I just finished my first collaboration with a woman. She's almost like a sister to me. She's just a dear friend, but what a wonderful experience to do that with your mother. And could you just talk a little bit about how that was working with her?
Mm-hmm. Well, my mother was just brilliant. She could take a piece of cloth and a pair of scissors and a needle and just make a dress that would fit you like a glove. She was just the most confident person I ever met was her. And she really thought that my being an artist was a mistake. Because everybody wants the best for their kid, And she just didn't see how that was going to lead to any kind of a decent life. And so she really was very unhappy about it, but she never really said it. So I got her involved in it. And because if she's going to be involved in it, I knew that it was going to have to be right. So that's why I was very happy when she started collaborating with me, because now she was complicit. And she would say to me, Ms. Ringold, and whenever she called me Ms. Ringold, I knew I was in trouble. She said, you have a lot of time to do a lot of work, which you never get paid for. But, I have clients she was a fashion designer, and she said, and I just can't, you know, spend my time doing a whole lot of work I can't sell. So you got to tell me what it is you want me to do, and I will help you. And she did. And she showed me what it was to make a quilt, because my great-great-grandmother, her great-grandmother, taught my great-grandmother how to make quilts and taught her how to make quilts. She said they would boil these bags that they had, flour in, and then they would bleach them and sew them together and do something. And but she never made a quilt other than what her great-grandmother taught her to do. So when she made that first quilt with me, that was the first quilt she had made since she was an adult, since she wasn't a kid anymore. So that was very exciting to her and very exciting to me. I just wish I had been a little more humble and had really soaked up all the techniques that she knew, you know, but I didn't know. I didn't know what it was that I should be really learning from her. So I didn't get as much as I could have gotten, should have gotten. But I got something, you know. It was a very wonderful period. And then we worked together. She died in 81. We worked together from 1970. So we had about 10 years together working.
I wanted to know who influenced you the most before you started college, or how did you get your start as an artist?
As an artist. Well, I think that the artist, there are two sources that are influential in my work. One is the whole genre of African sculpture, the masks, and the sculpture. The whole rhythm of the design, all of that, I was very influenced by. I had to find out about that myself, however. I didn't learn that in school, because they only taught me about the European art. And then what's the other thing? Oh, and the artists are, Jacob Lawrence is number one. He's the one that I learned to make all a series of, and his interest in the history of black people in America authenticated my history, that I could do that too. So it's really Jake and African masks and sculpture, and then a whole lot of other people who I just love, you know, and you can see them all in my work, you know. And Sergeant Johnson is one, an African-American sculptor. I love his work as well. And but some people I can borrow from more easily than others. And all artists do that. Most artists won't admit it, and I think it's so silly, you know, to try to pretend that there's something new under the sun. It's all been done, you know. I mean, you're doing it over, putting a slightly different spin on it, hopefully, but it doesn't matter, you know. It's just, I understand Picasso used to go into people's studios and steal their stuff before they had their show, and then deny he ever saw it. You know, like he tried to deny that his cubism came from African sculpture and masks. I mean, it's ridiculous. But, you know, some people do that. I don't want to do that.
Ms. Ringold, I had the pleasure of hearing you at the San Diego Museum about 15 years ago with your quilts.
Yeah.
And a few years ago on Girard Street in La Jolla, I found you in with one of your children's books.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's wonderful to see you again. I wondered, is there any place in Grand Rapids or any dealer in the Middle West that carries your work?
Sometimes I'm surprised that people are carrying my work that I don't know. I don't know of anybody. I'm really with ACA Galleries in New York. So that's my principal gallery. But anybody who can collect work of mine can sell it in their gallery. You know, so I mean, it could be anywhere. I don't know of anyone particularly in Grand Rapids.
Hello, I'm over here.
Okay.
Kind of hard to see. Can
Wave
you
your
talk-
hand. Wave your hand.
Right here.
Okay.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience when you went to visit Africa and how that affected your work there? And then the second question is, I have a son who loves art, and so sometimes me as a mother kind of overlook that. But can you talk about how your mom might have encouraged you as an artist in that sense?
Africa was the first time that I really felt a true sense of equality in the public. I mean, I would go in, I'd stay in the best hotels in Nigeria and Ghana. Those are my two first places that I went. And I would stay in the best hotels. And then I would tell them that I wanted to go to the bush to see this, and that. You know, I wanted to see all the art being done where I had seen it being done in art history books. And I'd go there and it would be right there. It was fabulous. Also, in the hotel, they call me USA. I thought I had my hair in beads and I wore all African clothes. And I thought I was passing. They knew all the time. They would come into the tea room, I would be sitting there, and they would come right straight for me. And I'd say, you know, how did you know that I'm the one? And they say, USA. We know you anywhere. I thought that was fascinating. But anybody who was in that hotel, any dignitary, anybody, they would introduce that person to me. I was like a big celebrity. And it was all because I was USA. And that was one of the greatest experiences of my life, was going to Nigeria and Ghana in 1976 and 77. And that was why I came home and wrote my autobiography in 1980, because of the experience that I had in Africa. Now, what was the other one you asked me about?
How do we continue to encourage our kids who are artists?
Oh, yes. My mother's thing was, when you grow up, you're going to college. I came from a family of teachers and dressmakers. The teachers taught in the South. Coming north to teach was a problem because we had segregated schools and African American teachers could not get jobs teaching. So then they became dressmakers. My mother was deathly afraid that I would be an artist and would not be able to make a living. Although I grew up in a neighborhood that had lots of artists in it. Aaron Douglas was there, Romeo Bearden was there. But I didn't know that those people were there. And even if I did know they were there, I didn't know they were famous. I didn't know the great contributions they had made because they weren't written about in books and they didn't teach me about them in school. So we didn't have the history of those people. We had the musicians were living with us too. Duke Ellington, all those people lived in the same area on Sugar Hill. But we knew about them because the music has always been understood and taken for the importance that it is, but not the art. And so she was afraid for me. She, however, was an artist herself, so she was able to help me. But I would say, encourage your kid who wants to be an artist. But if they can do something else, they should. Anybody who can not be an artist shouldn't be, because it's really very hard. But if they're determined, they should get every encouragement. And because you must persevere. It's going to be a struggle, and they must know this. So stay with him, Give him everything you've got. And if he ever wants to turn away, let him. It's okay.
Hello. I just wanted to ask you about your color palette, which is, it sort of looks like it's evolved, and I wanted you to comment on that, and the jazz things are so joyful, and the comment you made about blood red sky being meaningful.
Well, let me tell you a story about Blood Red Sky. I was in my studio at UCSD, University of California, San Diego, painting Jones Road when I first started with it. And it was very traumatic experience for me painting those pictures in the beginning. It was like they were charged with something. And into my studio walked this whole group of people who were visiting the campus. And they had just left the students' studios. And they were saying, oh, you have this huge studio. How come you've got this huge studio and the students have these little tiny little closets? Why is that? And my thing was, why are you in my studio? Interrupting me when I'm trying to paint. But I couldn't say that because this tour was for people who donate money to the college. You know, it was a fundraiser type of thing. And I didn't want to cause any trouble. So I just kept painting. And all of a sudden, my sky turned red. I was so mad. I didn't know what to do. Finally, my assistant came in, and she humored those people and got them away from me. But, so the red sky, and when I first did it, after they left and I calmed down, I got rid of the red sky. But then it came back later. You know, sometimes you get a new thing and you don't use it right then, but you're going to use it later. So it came back later, and now it's really back. So I have this whole series of Under a Blood Red Sky. So that's one of the things. So I think I've had a series of changes with my colors. In the late 60s, my color turned dark. And I explained that was about the Black is Beautiful part of the civil rights movement. You know, the knowledge that black could be beautiful was not something that I had ever heard before, that anybody had ever heard before. But it sounded beautiful because all people want to be beautiful. All people are beautiful and should know it. And you should be able to say it out loud. Like, what's his name? Say it out loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Yeah, these are important things. And so that period of my color palette had to do with that period in America in my life. And now I think my color is, I don't know how to describe it now. I guess it's still not pastel, not light, but it's lightened somewhat because you have to, in order to paint with acrylic paint or with oil paint, you have to be able to make your colors that are transparent, opaque. That's very important because if the color is not made opaque, you won't be able to see the true richness of it. So you put a tinge of white to any of those dark colors, all those Prussian blues and Viridian greens and all, to bring the color up and give it its magic. And then you can darken it, do whatever you want. But you can only do that with white. White is the only color that will lighten something. Some people try to lighten with yellow. You can't do that. Yellow brightens, not lightens. And you'll have nothing but trouble if you use yellow. So you must use white. Now, if you want to darken a color, you can use any dark color. Sometimes black, not always. So these things are very tricky. And from making my color go from the medium range to the dark range, I learned a lot about what you do to mix colors to make them what they are. It's actually The only way you can learn is by doing it. You just have to experiment with it. Are you a painter?
A little bit of everything. Kind of help, I guess. Well, nothing like that.
Well, you are if you do it. You got to do it. That's the key. Right? Isn't that right? Uh-huh. Okay, anybody else?
Thank you, Nina.